Mm-hmm.
By the way, if I it seems like I'm looking down and I'm distracted, I'm trying to sort of multitask. I'm still trying to get back into my regular schedule and trying to multitask, do something while I'm doing that. So it looks like I'm
Do what you
distracted.
gotta do, girl.
Yeah. All right. So for this article, all right. So Sam, it was very interesting, but I'm gonna admit, I'm kind of unfamiliar with like that format of media. So like I'm probably not going to have big opinions this week, but if anybody else wants to like start off with their opinions, I mean, or like start off with the questions, we can do that.
So this week, were we analyzing video games, or what were we analyzing specifically?
I was just kind of in just a sense of science fiction or fantasy in general, whether it's, I guess, so the author talked a lot about video games at the start, but that's not kind of what I was trying to get at. I was thinking more like books and movies, like just thinking I've read my fair share of fantasy and sci-fi stuff. That's like the books I like to read. And I don't know a single book that I've read that had anybody that was homosexual in any of the books. So it's like I just feel like it was very underrepresented, more so in books and movies, I guess, since that's probably a more common media.
Alrighty, so I do know of a series that does have a few non-heterosexual characters. Have you ever heard of the Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that has some characters that are not like main characters, but they are part of like the main cast.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's like yeah, that author, she is pretty good with including diverse characters, especially characters who are like a part of the LGBTQI community. Like I think of one of her series, there's a transgender character. And then there's like a gay couple, and they have they adopted two children. So yeah, when you say that it's kind of underrepresented in movies and books, that's still the case. But I feel like in today's society and in 2018, they're working to try and fix that. Like, for example, in the question you put, the article was written back in 2014. Do you think there have been any improvements on the representation of LGBT characters in sci-fi fantasy since then? So if I answer that question, I'm going to say yes, there have been developments, but there's still very problematic elements. Like, while there are a lot more inclusion of people who identify as non-heterosexual, sorry, there still are quite a few characters that when they are included, they still are presented in kind of very stereotypical, sassy, snap, kind of, when it's like gay characters, they're very effeminate. And with lesbian characters, they're still kind of presented very kind of tough girl, butch, that sort of thing.
Right.
So while there's definitely a lot more inclusion, I kind of feel like has less to do with because it's the right thing to like have more diversity in that sense, and more to do with like a political statement, really, because people are saying we want more diversity, we want more inclusion of LGBTQ people of color, blah 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 blah. But I feel like when these characters and stuff are introduced in books and movie, it really has more to do with like a political statement or anything, and less to do with like appeasing consumers of those formats and genres, really.
And so I agree with you, but I also would like to add too that while they have represented more homosexual couples, they really have not even touched gender nonconforming. They haven't even, they really haven't included transgender people. Although they're making steps, they're really not including the entire queer community. They're just choosing specific aspects that are more widely acceptable, I would say. In the straight community, it's more widely acceptable to be gay than to be gender nonconforming or transgender from the straight community, and that comes back to like the dominant group and the subordinate group. And also from my reading, I found on another article, and it was talking about how sometimes the science fiction community will kind of hint and suggest that characters are members of the queer community, but they don't come out and say it outright because they don't want to lose their cisgender audience. So they'll mention it, but they really won't embrace it fully because they are like doing this balancing act where they're able to get the queer community excited about a project, but then present it in a way that the cisgender community would still like enjoy it or like want to watch it because they're trying to make the most money that they can. Of course, it always comes back to money.
Yeah, exactly.
sure.
And as far as like not seeing enough in like movies, TV, books that include like LGBTQ has that representation. Have you guys ever heard of this web series called Carmilla?
No.
No. Well, like all 3 seasons are on YouTube, and it's like each episode is like 2 to 16 minutes long. It's very short, but it's like I think it's a really done series. It like features a majority female cast, and pretty much all of them are non-heterosexual. Like the 2 main lead characters are lesbians, and one of them is a vampire, and it deals with like a lot of mythological fantasy folklore, and there's even a non-binary character on there. And I thought that was very interesting because how often do we see a character who is non-binary in anything, really? I feel like she was or I guess the proper pronoun would be they, I guess. Yeah, how often do we see a non-binary character in anything? It was like really interesting, and until I started watching that series, I actually did not realize that that was actually a part of the LGBTQ frame, non-binary. I didn't actually realize that, and then when I saw this character, I was like, that's a thing. And so I looked up and I was like, yes, it is. And then, yeah, it's very informative and very well done. So you ever want to look into that?
Carmel.
Yeah, I recommend it. All right.
Regarding video games in the sci-fi community, I've noticed that it's extremely rare to see any homosexual or transgender or anybody who's basically not straight in any type of video game. I think maybe the first one I've seen so far was actually last year. I don't know if you guys have heard of Overwatch, but they finally had a character that was a lesbian. And so I want to say regarding to the first question, we are making improvements compared to 2014, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, it's a little harder, I think, in video games because it has to be, a story, right? So if it's not built into the story of the video game or that kind of video games, it's hard to kind of create that kind of character, I would think.
And another thing, video games usually have this sort of like thing where you can build your own character.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, and like most people who play the games are usually going to choose like an avatar who I guess they would say, who I guess if there's that sort of thing in video games, is presented as heterosexual. So yeah, I think with that in video games, like the lack of representation of people who identify as LGBTQ plus, I feel like it has less to do with the creators a lot of the times and more how like the gamers want to present themselves in the game or how they'd like to play the game. Like that ending sentence at the end of the article, if science fiction has a role at all, it's to reflect that reality. It's to reflect that reality, not deny it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, when you're like playing a video game, you don't really want to think about reality. You kind of want to like be in this fantasy world, and the fantasy norm or like the what's the word for it? Default is heterosexual. So
I think it's similar to the treatment of the queer community their representation in media is very similar to POC representation and female representation, because when they are given roles, their characters are really not fleshed out. They don't have a good like plot to them, or they're killed. Like, it's very similar to the way that especially like female POCs are treated. And
yeah, like we talked about in our last video series. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I think that's at about the 10-minute marker. So before we end this whole shindig, did anybody have any like last minute thoughts or anything? Sam,
So I mean, I guess just kind of along the lines of the second statement with sort of science fiction as a role, it's to reflect reality, not deny it. I think that's very true. And like you talked about, like I think a lot of times it's based on the consumers of whatever media it is, rather than necessarily whoever's making the media, because they're going to have a lot of influence on what's going to come out of it and what's going to be accepted.
True.
alrighty.